All right, so I guess I need to waste some of my time going over this because Aaron Julius is obviously the man, and he decides who can tune cars and who can't, even though in this case he can't even install a turbo on a car. So we're going to go over this. What I have here on the screen is obviously the customer's modifications down here on the right. It's just showing that it has a crappy intake, a Whoosh V3 intercooler, Depot Racing Catalyst downpipe, the Turbonetics S280, or sorry, Turbo Technics S280. Shifter plate doesn't matter, 3-inch straight pipe exhaust, and this is what matters here, TurboSmart 14 PSI Wastegate actuator. Um, I have this screenshotted out because I don't want to show the customer's email or any of his personal information, but this is his email that he sent me. This is the log from the poll. Um, I don't know if this log is when the car had an engine failure or if this is the one before. He said he did 2 logs. I imagine it felt like complete dookie on the first log. A second log wasn't needed. Obviously, there was a problem, and you're going to see for yourself. So we'll drag this over here and open up the log. Just so it shows, you can see down here, Tune Plus E30 S280 IWG. This is internal wastegate actuator, basically, and then this is version 8. This is the base map. So what we usually do on base maps is before we start shaping the boost curve or anything like that, we just set a static wastegate duty cycle. So you can see here that I usually set it for 40. Now the reason why we set it for 40 is because we have a 14 PSI wastegate actuator. This is an actuator that we make for the S280 as an upgrade because the factory that comes with it is way too soft. So all the preloads that you hear about regarding, aftermarket wastegate actuators, that's how you set the tension on the actuator itself. Well, on our website, we list out the recommended preloads for the wastegate actuator, and those are there for a specific reason. There's a reason why they're all different numbers. Every vehicle kind of reacts differently, so we do a lot of testing on it to figure out what the best preload amount is. In this case, preload should be set to about 4 or 5 millimeters. And what that does is it gives us like a 1-to-1 ratio. I mean, that's not the technical term really for it, but in this case, uh, percentage wise, if you take 14 psi and you add 40% wastegate duty cycle, that's going to give you your target boost. So 40%, so we got 14 psi base plus 40% wastegate duty cycle is 5.6. Add that on top of that 14, it gets you 19.6. So 20 psi is our target boost level that we want on base maps. That'll tell us that the preload is set correctly. If it's too low, we know that it needs more preload. If it's too high, we obviously either have a problem with the boost control solenoid, the way it's routed, or because the wastegate actuator is preloaded too much. So looking at this, there's a lot of problems. We're going to go over all of them. I'm also going to show you a comparison um, log as well from another customer. I'm tuning these S280s pretty much every single day, easily tuned, if I were to guess, about 100, 120 of them. Uh, and I do see, high boost amounts from customers that have had or that have made a mistake during the install. Most of the time, the car survives, no problem, can take the boost on the first logs. And then I see the log. Obviously, if there's an issue, I'm going to address it. And then I guide the customer through how to fix it. So in this case, there's a lot going on here. It's not just wrong preload. It's not just wastegate actuator and boost control solenoid routing that's a problem. There's a lot at play here. So we're going to dig into it real quick. I'm going to just move on over to just this, and hopefully we keep emails hidden. Yes. All right. So let's highlight the target area, open this up. All right. So looking at this boost graph, at 3,700 RPM, this turbo should be at peak boost. So with proper preload, with this base map, as you can see, wastegate duty cycle is at 40%. With the correct install and no problems at all, at this RPM, you're going to be seeing 20 PSI. I'm going to show you in another log from another customer. I'm just going to randomly grab one from my inbox and load it up. but you'll see that it's going to hit 20 psi about this mark, and it's going to hold the red line. It might have a slight taper depending on their elevation and the configuration on the car, but for the most part, it's going to be 20 psi flat. So looking at boost alone, ignore the RPM being jagged as hell. We haven't even showed timing yet, so just look at boost alone. 14 psi at 3,500 RPM. For example, with this turbo at max tilt on our Fiesta, we're running 34 pounds of boost on an S280, on E50, on a stock engine. Mind you, we're hitting 34 pounds of boost at 3,300 RPM. At 3,300 RPM, this thing is only making 9.64 psi. So we got a problem. Not sure what that was. So going up, obviously going up in the RPM, we have boost creep. You know, if boost was steady and the wastegate was just held in one fixed position, because that's what's being commanded there with wastegate duty cycle, we should be seeing flat boost, but we do not. We see creep. We're seeing creep all the way up to 28, 29 psi. When you get to about here, you can see if I go into tip, you can see this flattens out up top here. That means that the sensor is maxed out. So the reason why boost is showing a little bit lower and not maxed out is because the throttle, you can see here, is closing to block out the boost. That's, you know, the way, another way to control boost is you use the throttle to close it and prevent the boost coming pre-throttle from entering the engine. So with that, you know, we should be seeing our desired boost amount, which is set for 40.5. That's absolute. So you have to subtract barrel pressure from it. So 40.5 minus barrel pressure of 14.32. So 40.5 minus, go back here, 1432. 26.18. So this thing at max should be showing 26 pounds of boost. Obviously, we're going beyond that. So the throttle's trying to keep it at target 26, but it cannot because the boost is just going, you know, max tilt. That means we have no boost control on this car at all. Either that is from the boost control solenoids routed incorrectly. I haven't really got good enough pictures from the customer to really determine that. Even if it is hooked up correctly, there's other factors too. One of them being the intake itself. So if an intake is causing turbulence on the inlet of the compressor wheel or on the inlet of the turbo, the compressor has a hard time keeping a steady RPM. If intake flow changes through the RPM, you're going to have different boosts and it's going to go all over the place. So I think this is a factor here because in some of the pictures that were sent to me, the intake was completely disconnected, it looks like. In fact, one of the pictures showed instead of a clamp, there was a zip tie, and in one of the pictures, there was a clamp completely missing on the inlet of the turbo itself. So with that all said, obviously, there's some sort of issue here with boost control. Um, Unfortunately, this is an issue that we run into with e-tuning is the car is not in front of us. So if this car was here in front of me right now, I'd be able to diagnose it. Yes, it's obviously failed. I mean, that was posted online, but it's failed because it wasn't installed correctly. The tune, like I said, is at 40% wastegate duty cycle. If everything was stalled as it should have been and hooked up correctly, this boost plot should be flat, a flat 20 psi plus or minus, let's say, to a psi. So I'm going to pop open another data log here. We'll just open it up here. It's going to be hard to do this without showing anybody's emails. So what should I do? What should I do? Let's go. I'm just going to have to try to edit this video here. So let's go revisions. Let me look through these customers here. Let me see who is an S280 customer off the bat. Daniel Higgins, I believe. Nope. Oh, Lance is. Lance is an S280 customer. So we'll just grab his logs. We'll toss them in here. Looking at it, okay, S280 with our actuator, which I knew that. So going on here, let's see. 3,300 RPM, we're at 22 PSI. Wastegate duty cycle, 40%. This is obviously going to vary a little bit. It's never going to target exactly 40%. Reason for that is battery voltage will play a factor here because it has a compensation for battery voltage. There's also compensation for charge temp, ambient temp. So it's going to be a little bit, off from 40%. Obviously 1.65% is not a big deal. But as I was saying, this has our actuator. This has an S280 on it. This is um, at 40% wastegate duty cycle, and we have, as I said, 20 psi at 3,300, and it's flat with zero taper going out to 6,500 RPM. So this should not be happening because it is flat wastegate duty cycle command for the entire RPM. So we should see flat boost in return. So going beyond this, dropping off boost pressure, ignoring boost pressure, we're going to go to timing. Timing is a huge issue, and I think a contributing factor here to the failure in this car. Luckily, we have a log to kind of look at this stuff. But first things first, down here, we're only at 14 pounds of boost, and we're already seeing a ton of ignition corrections. It's jumping all over the place. There's two things going on here. There's ignition corrections, and as you can see in the log, ignition correction isn't being logged, and the reason for that is because we have actual total ignition timing. Technically, we don't need ignition correction because if we see any deviation between the four cylinders, we know that that one cylinder that's not following has a correction. So going here, we can see cylinder 4, cylinder 3, cylinder 2 is all at the same timing. Cylinder 1 has a huge correction. 11 minus 5, we're at about 6 degrees of correction here. So we have knock at 15 degrees, or sorry, at 15 pounds of boost, we have knock. This is an E30 car, so you should not see any knock at all at that low of boost, and honestly at this low of timing, especially at this RPM. We're at 3,500 RPM. So as you can see, the entire run, you have a ton of deviation in each cylinder. And then you have up here where you see the peach line, which is going to be cylinder 1, is knocking more than these cylinders. And then as you get up here, cylinder 4 is knocking more, so it's down here. And then at the end, you obviously have a lot of knock, and it's got a ton of reduction. So there's an ignition issue going on here too. This is not just a boost issue. Um, it's hard to say what exactly it could be. I would say that plugs are probably the culprit here. The customer does have NGK plugs installed, and he did mix fuel about a day and a half before. This is important information because if he just filled up with E30 and just went out and ripped off this log, he could still have 91 or 93, whatever the previous fuel is inside in the tank, and it's not actually reaching the E30 yet because the E30 has been ran long enough. So that's a reason why I recommend customers when switching from 91 or 93 to E30 or any other ethanol mix to drive about 20 miles minimum before you start getting on it, especially if you switch to tunes. So, but yeah, this customer did it right. He filled up about a day and a half before the install and before this log was taken. So more than likely E30 was reaching the fuel rail and going into the engine. However, on ignition timing, we're seeing knock. So that's going to tell me more than likely plugs are an issue here. He installed these plugs back in June. I'm not sure, you know, if he installed them correctly. I wasn't tuning the car prior to this. If he had any other issues, any knock, if it would have been nice to have been tuning this car prior. That way I could have seen if the car was running normal before he, did this install. But we have an issue here with ignition. Spark plugs, either that or coil packs. It's really hard to say. Like I said, problem with e-tuning is the car not sitting in front of us. I can't diagnose it, so that's why we want customers to bring known good running cars to for tuning, and not use the tuning process as a tool for diagnostics. Only use tuning for diagnostics when you know you need a tune to fix an issue you have that might be related to something you installed. So, it's unfortunate that this customer had this issue. There's definitely an install problem going on here based on boost pressure, and then he obviously has some sort of engine problem going on. Um, if this was a second log, I have to ask the customer again. If this was a second log, the damage could have already been done on the first log. So all this ignition and all this really jagged RPM here could have been damage sustained from the first log, but boost should not be anything like this. So this isn't a tune issue. It's clear it's not a tune issue. I pulled the log directly from the customer's email and popped it right in here, and I showed the comparison log right here. This is a properly installed turbo. It's hooked up correctly. Everything's fine. Um, you can see down here in the tune file that he's on version C. That was because we made adjustments to the preload. Just like I said in the beginning of the video here, we send out a base map to see where the boost is at, a nice safe boost level, and then we adjust it from there. So this customer was a little low on target boost, so we brought it up, and you can see now with proper preload adjustment, 20 psi flat. That's the original target here. So um, if we go down here, I just wanted to compare something else to see. Oh, S200 intake. So he doesn't have one of the crappy intakes I mentioned the other one. So if we had a 2JR intake on this is kind of going down off the path here, but if this had a 2J intake on it, what I usually see is a lot of taper up top. So this boost would actually dive off up top. So because this customer has a 2JR intake, this boost should have been flat, hit 20 pounds of boost, about 3,300 RPM, and then it would taper off slowly to probably about 18 psi because of the intake itself. We recommend using a full length intake. I know TJRs are popular because they make a ton of noise, but they also make crap for power, in my opinion. And plus, you don't need to hack your car up to get an intake that works well. Uh, Crossover pipe to a map intake, bare minimum map intake. We run the ITG intake on our car, and we have zero taper at all, and our car made a ton of power on the S280. So it sucks I had to make a video like this, but it was necessary just to go over and kind of show, when somebody goes, running their mouth online, there needs to be two sides of the story. On his end, basically what happened is he just went online immediately and tried slandering us because he probably made a mistake. And looking at the install, it was not a clean install. There was definitely some poor craftsmanship going on there, especially with the intake itself. I'm going to attach a picture to the post that you'll see where this video's at of the intake on it and what looks like it's disconnected, a zip tie holding it on, and a clamp missing. So that'll do it.